Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. It's Wednesday, April 23rd. The transfer portal officially closed for new entries, but that doesn't mean the recruiting has stopped for most schools, I would say, at this point around the country. Still putting together their rosters for next season. On today's episode of Podcast on the Brink, we're going to be joined by an old friend, William McDermott, formerly of Inside the Hall, is now doing a variety of different things. Still writes a little bit about IU basketball on his own Substack, but his main gig is working on the radio for the Louisville Sports Network. Get to William in just a second. Wanted to take a moment to remind you this episode of Podcast on the Brink brought to you by Visit Bloomington. Just because the basketball season is over doesn't mean the fun stops. Spring is the perfect time to explore everything Bloomington has to offer. Hike the trails at Griffey Lake Nature Preserve, then refuel with local flavors on tap at Upland Brewing Company. And don't forget about the many music festivals coming to Bloomington this spring. Whether you're into outdoor adventures, food, or just relaxing in a vibrant college town, Visit Bloomington's got you covered. Start planning your spring getaway now at visitbloomington.com. William, last time we spoke, it was before the battle for Atlantis. How the world has changed since then in terms of Indiana basketball. When you watched those games, how shocked were you at just how that first game went in Atlantis?
Well, I definitely shocked, but I think part of me also, and I think a lot of people who follow IU closely, they weren't that shocked. And to me, looking back on the season, that game was kind of, I think it was just kind of a eye-opening result for a lot of people in the fan base, and I think that was a big turning point for a lot of people in the fan base if they hadn't been turned off already on the Mike Woodson era. But certainly it was a disastrous result from IU. And I just remember the way that, IU played them close in the first half, and they were teeter-tottering, and then Louisville went on a little bit of a push to end the first half. And then coming out of the locker room, I mean, it was just like a bomb went off. Louisville, Miles Rice could not handle the pressure. Indiana, they looked lost. They couldn't get the ball up the floor, lazy defensively. It just was a ridiculous second half. One of the biggest implosions I can remember seeing, at least following in terms of a covering basketball standpoint.
Yeah, my dad wrote at some point after that game that was kind of the beginning of the end for Mike Woodson. And I think some people responded like, no, he still had a whole season. But if you watch that game closely enough, it was foreshadowing of what was to come. We saw so many performances, maybe not to that level, because Gonzaga game was, I guess, a little bit better. But then you had the performances against Illinois at home, and you had the Iowa performance where it was basically a couple months later, and it was the same thing. So in many ways, you're right. It was kind of just a turning point. It kind of also showed just how shaky the ground was that Mike Woodson was standing on in terms of the fan base. That it after what they did in the portal, it basically just took getting blown out one time for most of the people to be out on it. So again, don't want to rehash the Mike Woodson situation, but I just thought it was funny to bring up because that was the last time you were on the show. You've done obviously a lot of work. I just want to check on you real quick professionally, because you have had a transition now to the real world, working down for the Louisville Sports Network. How was that first year for you doing football and basketball?
It was great. I mean, I think when you show up every single day and you're at every single game and you have a role in every single game, I think you kind of develop a sense of appreciation for the people that do show up every single day and do it, because I think, working in sports media or working in broadcasting, like, it's different. I mean, I had to work on Thanksgiving Day, as did you. I had to work on New Year's Day and stuff like that. And that was all very different for me, but it's also part of what comes with the job. And then now it's the off season, and I can kind of sit back and relax a little bit more. But I guess with the portal open and everything now, there never really is an off season. But it was a really fun first year. I think I learned a lot. I got a lot better, and definitely things that I'm going to carry out with me the rest of the way through this journey.
So you've still stayed engaged with IU basketball. I know you're still pretty active on X, and you write a lot of stuff on your Substack. What's kind of made you continue to stay drawn? Obviously, you went to IU, you wrote for Inside the Hall, you worked at other
Mhm.
student media outlets. Why have you kind of wanted to still stay engaged in terms of writing about the team? And a lot of the breakdowns you've been doing recently have been pretty in depth, and you're taking a lot of time doing that. So I'm just
Yeah.
kind of curious, why you still wanted to stay engaged with that.
I just love basketball. I love IU basketball. I think anybody who's ever walked into Assembly Hall, I think knows that place just has a way of sucking you in, and getting underneath your skin, and it definitely did that to me. And the program did. Even, I covered the team for 3 years, two of them with you, and I think being able to be in the building and the places I got to go is really cool. And I just wanted to keep following it because I had a follower base that, I think that I developed that appreciated my content and knew that if they were to look for IU basketball stuff, that I could provide that. And so I obviously wanted to continue writing as well. And that was a way that I can do that, through the blog and the newsletter. So, yeah.
Good stuff. I've been enjoying following
Thank you.
and good stuff. It's one reason I wanted to have you on is because you have taken a lot of time to look at a lot of these players that Indiana's added. I just want to kind of get your thoughts on some of these additions and what you make of them and kind of how all these pieces fit together. Starting with Tucker DeVries, obviously he's kind of the name that a lot of people are focused on, the highest rated player in terms of transfer portal rankings. Although we've kind of learned maybe not to get too caught up in that
Yeah.
after the experience of last year. A lot of these guys, maybe not from high major programs, really. Besides DeVries, I don't think any of them have high major experience coming into the Indiana program. But I think people are a lot more optimistic going into next season. Given the regime change and just how these pieces may fit together compared to last season. But DeVries, fair to call him maybe the centerpiece of what's going to be going on with Indiana basketball next season?
I definitely think he's going to be one of the centerpieces. Him and Lamar Wilkerson, especially on the offensive end. And I think when you think of Tucker DeVries, everybody, it's the coach's son. Everybody expected him to come to IU, and I think rightfully so. But he's been a little bit undervalued, I think, in this transfer portal haul. Only played in 8 games at West Virginia, but when he did play, he was one of the better shooters in the nation, as he always has been, 47% on 55 attempts in his 8 games at West Virginia. And then even dating back to his time at Drake, he knows the DeVries system obviously very well. He's willing defensively, and he's a guy who can do multiple things well on the offensive end, a good rebounder at his size. And I think a lot of people forget that he's 6'7", right? So Indiana, you look at their height on the wing and rebounding ability, that's definitely, and length on the wing, that's definitely something that is improving on this roster in terms of based on the years prior that we've seen under Archie Miller and Mike Woodson. So Tucker DeVries, it definitely starts with him. But in totality, I think the group that Darren DeVries has brought in, you're seeing a plan and you're seeing a trend of the kind of players that he's bringing in. And Tucker DeVries may be an anomaly because he's his son.
Yeah, you're right. It's almost like any other time there'd be like a huge celebration, right? When a player of this caliber committed, but
Right.
it was like he's there. I was there for the press conference, and he just walks into the press conference with his IU hoodie on. So it's like, all right, he's never actually come out and said anything on social media that he's committed or anything, but it's just assumed that he's coming along. What about his offensive game? Maybe you talked about the shooting. Is there anything maybe that you've seen of him that maybe is a little bit underrated? I was looking at his assist numbers. He actually seems to be a pretty willing passer and distributor too, which a guy that scores that much, particularly at the level he does, you don't necessarily see the same assist numbers out of guys like that.
With West Virginia last season, he definitely served more as a primary spot up guy. I mean, he only attempted 32s, and he attempted 55 threes in those 8 games, and he was only 30% on those two. So him getting around the basket, I think at the high major level, it's not necessarily an issue for him, but it's not a strength. But I do think you mentioned his passing. He is a willing passer and he makes good decisions too. And I also think that has to go with playing under his dad and his system that is obviously heavily predicated on ball movement, passing, spacing, opening up the floor. But for me, Alex, if you watch his tape as a shooter, his off ball movement is really impressive. He knows how to get open and he knows how to get to his spots on the perimeter. And it also helps that he can hit shots from 25 plus feet out. So,
Yeah, you watch some of those clips from Battle for Atlantis, and
right.
he was way beyond the line. It wasn't even
Yeah.
it wasn't like he was a foot or two behind. He was 6 or 7 feet, and he was making the shots effortlessly.
And he's got the green light too. I mean, if he's open, they want him to shoot it no matter where he is.
So Connor Enright was actually, I guess, the first real commitment among this group, coming over from DePaul. But obviously, the tie-in there is he played 2 seasons for DeVries at Drake. He's a guy maybe not getting as much fanfare as some of the other names, but you look at what he's able to do from a defensive standpoint. His assist rate was really good last season. He and maybe I'm wrong. I've only watched him on film, but I get the feeling that he's going to be one of those guys in the Big Ten that Indiana fans are going to love having on their team, and that other teams are going to hate him. Like some of the players that over the years that have played for Wisconsin that I know Indiana fans are like, when is like a Ben Brust? Remember him? I don't know if you're maybe a little bit before your time played for Wisconsin.
A little bit before, I think. Yeah.
Brad Davison,
Yeah.
those kind of guys where it was like they were just a pest at all times out there, and I get the feeling that that's kind of the player that he's going to be for Indiana.
I mean, he's like a little junkyard dog. He's 6'2", just like 185 pounds, but he really gets after it on the defensive end. And then I think he also provides something on the offensive end, right? I think a lot of people, when you have guys that come off the bench, you need guys that can do multiple things well. And I think Connor Enright is one of those guys. His assist rate, I mean, he only played in 23 games. He had an injury with DePaul last year, but it was 16th in the country, right? I mean, that's pretty impressive for a guy who's not very, high ball usage, a guy who's not going to be a scoring threat as much. And then he also is capable as an outside shooter, but defensively, he will get in your grill. He loves to take charges. And that's something that I think both of us know that Indiana fans are going to love watching him get down in a defensive stance and make some plays and wreak some havoc. And I think that couples really well with the other guards that they've brought in particular, Tatum Connerway, who I thought was one of the best defensive guards available in the transfer portal this season. So Enright, as a guy who's not going to be a starter, but maybe you have him playing 16, 18, 20 minutes a game, can fill in when needed for foul trouble and stuff like that. He'll play a role and he'll fill the role, and he knows his role. And I think that's really important to have coming off the bench.
For sure. Reed Bailey was, I think, kind of going in chronological order here through these guys. Reed Bailey was the next commitment. And he too, I think, has maybe flown a little bit under the radar. Just, he was an outstanding player last season at Davidson. He was an all league first player, or all league first team player. The one thing that stands out about him, he can step out a little bit at his size. It's a little bit unique. Rebounding numbers, not really a strength of his, and that's kind of one thing I want to bring up and maybe talk a little bit about later is in terms of what they need maybe going forward to fill out the roster. But I think he can play some 5, play some 4 as well. What stood out about Reed Bailey just from watching his film?
His passing. I think he's one of the best passing big men in the country, really. I think some of the angles that he finds, and at 6'10", he doesn't play like he's 6'10", which I think that's kind of what you're hinting at with the rebounding stuff. But I don't think that's necessarily going to be a problem because he can space the floor, because he can pass so well. And he was also really good at cutting off the ball. This is a guy that knows how to get into the lane. And I don't want to compare him to a guy like Malik Renew when he does get around the basket with his footwork, but he was pretty solid against A-10 competition around the basket with his footwork. He definitely struggled with the more physically imposing big men that he faced, especially those, really good athletes. But his passing, Alex, was just outstanding. His assist rate, 25.3 for a 6'10", 230-pound center or forward. That was 181st in the country, 6th best assist rate in the conference in the A10 as a 6'10 guy. Doesn't matter what conference you're in or what team you're playing for. That's really, really impressive. And at Davidson, the offense really ran through him. That's not going to be the case at Indiana. So if he can play more of an off-ball spacing, cutting, passing role as a 6'10 guy, he's going to be really valuable. But I am really curious to see how Darren DeVries uses him, because he's kind of in a unicorn at his position, and a player that I'm not sure how well he fits in DeVries' system based off years prior, because he likes to have these athletic, big rim runners who can set screens, facilitate stuff like that, defend, protect the rim. And then I'm immediately thinking about like a Darnell Brody at Drake, or Amani Hansberry at West Virginia last season. Reed Bailey definitely is not that kind of player, but he's going to be able to provide a lot on the offensive end. And another thing, his foul rate. He knows how to get fouled, and he's a good free throw shooter. 77% on 226 attempts last year. His foul rate was 8th best in the A10. That's pretty impressive, and a guy who knows how to get to his spots and be effective around the rim.
So I've been thinking a lot lately just about how many players Indiana ultimately needs, because I know that a lot of people are saying, well, you can have 15 scholarship players now. I think the idea of having 15 players on a college basketball team that actually expect to play is in an era of player movement that we're in, I think is a ridiculous idea, because you're going to have immediately 4 or 5 guys who are disgruntled from day one that aren't getting a chance to play at all. And I think you can take a couple of guys maybe at the end of your bench with the idea that they're going to be development pieces for the end, or for the future. But I would say the best teams in college basketball, play 8-9 guys regularly. That's your rotation. Indiana's already up to 8 scholarship players when you figure in Trent Sisley. So I'm thinking 2 or 3 more guys that they probably need. Would you agree with that in terms of the profile of what they need moving forward? Obviously, I think they need a player who's at least 6'10", that can provide some rim protection. I'm not saying it has to be a starter. I'm not saying it's actually someone has to play 20, 25 minutes, but there are going to be nights in the Big Ten where you're going up against the front line, where you have somebody that you need some physicality to throw in there and try to stop. So that to me is the biggest glaring need. Just your thoughts on just the overall number of players maybe that you expect Indiana to have, and what the needs are moving forward.
I'm with you. I think around 12 to 13 scholarship guys is still the right number, because then you run into this problem where you're promising guys money, and you're promising guys things in the portal just for them to be the 13th, 14th, and 15th guys. And I think that just leaves a lot of people unhappy. I think it creates some weird locker room dynamics and problems. So if you can find like 10 guys, 9-10 guys that you feel really good about, these are going to be, the central pieces of our rotation. We feel good about them playing in any given game. And then maybe you have 1, 2, or 3 projects, maybe a guy you redshirt, a freshman coming in who has a little bit of work to do before they see high major basketball. I think that's kind of the good direction when it comes to roster building. And I do think that's the direction that Darren DeVries is going in. And you mentioned in terms of what they need, I do think it'll be around 2, 3 more players, maybe 4. And I think the biggest glaring weakness on the roster as of now is certainly the front court athleticism on the wing and rim protection. They don't really have that physical enforcer down low. And in Darren DeVries' system, they're not going to be the focal point of the offense or, the go-to usage guy. He just needs somebody who can run the floor, protect the rim, be a lob threat, and be physically imposing. And I think they'll be okay. And probably a couple of those guys. I mean, they only have 1 forward on the roster, in my opinion, right now, and that's Reed Bailey.
Yeah, I mean, they've got 1 player taller than 6'7". I don't know
Yeah.
And height's not everything. I mean, Hansberry played a ton last year at West Virginia. I think he's
Right.
6'8". So I'm not saying the player has to be 6'11" or 6'10". They can be 6'8" if they're good. If they're long and they play taller than they're actually their height, or they rebound the ball, they block shots. I think that's fine. But I agree with you that they need someone who can provide some resistance in the rim, because I'm not sure against the Michigan States of the world.
Yeah.
Purdue's
And the
maybe a little bit
Michigans,
different. Michigan, I don't know how you can survive without having some type of presence at the rim.
you can't. Definitely not in the Big Ten. I mean, and I think this is a part where maybe Mike Woodson and they maybe had put an overemphasis on it in the front court. I think we all agree with that. And I do worry that Darren DeVries maybe is putting an underemphasis on it, but we'll see. We don't know what the roster is going to pan out to be. But I think if you can just find a guy that's going to do the dirty work, they'll set screens, they'll rebound well, they can push the ball quickly, be an outlet, good conditioning, run the floor, protect the rim, and to be a lob threat and solid in the pick and roll, I think they're going to be just fine. And I think if you can find a guy that you feel comfortable pairing with the guards that Indiana has brought in, it could be a really good fit. And there are plenty of those types of players out there. I mean, that's kind of the modern big man in college basketball nowadays. But then you also have the Reed Bailey post player who can score in the post, right, and be an offensive threat. So I think if you can couple those two together, then you're kind of cooking something down low.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be adjustment for Indiana fans going from Trace Jackson Davis
Yeah.
to Khalil Ware to Umar Ballo, Malik Renew. I don't think you're going to have a player that obviously has that much of a role offensively, but I do think they are going to find some type of post presence just in terms of rebounding and defense that they can put on this roster. Lamar Wilkerson, obviously the highest profile, I guess, recruitment of this portal cycle so far for Indiana, just because we had the visit to Indiana, then we had the trip to Kentucky with Lamar out on the horse track with Mark Pope, in the winner's circle, and
Yeah.
walking the what a weird scenario
The
that was to see
discourse
those
on that
pictures.
was hilarious.
It was just funny to see how it was basically no fanfare for his Indiana visit, like it was all under the radar. And then at
Mm-hmm.
Kentucky, they have him out in public at Keeneland, and they're taking pictures. It just, I'm sure Lamar
Meeting the
loved the experience.
horses
It, it
and
was it was fun for him. But and then he goes home for a couple days, and I think Indiana fans were unsure what to expect. And then Darren DeVries flies down there and uh, talks to him and get the commitment. That was, I think, just a big moment for DeVries in this portal cycle to show that he could win a recruitment against Kentucky, Auburn, Ole Miss, and I think when you're getting a player that those are the schools that want him, you're going in the right waters, right? Look at the SEC the last couple of years, what they've done in college basketball compared to the Big Ten. I mean, the fact that they're able to land a player that those schools wanted, I think, says a lot about what kind of player they're getting with Lamar Wilkerson.
yeah, I mean, you look at, I mean, Walter Clayton, right? I mean, you see what he did in the NCAA tournament, Florida winning the national title. He was at Iona, right, for a couple years before going to Florida. There's a certain kind of profile. Chaz Lanier from North Florida going to Tennessee, even Dalton Connect the year before that. This is a really good sign. I think that Indiana beat out those schools, but certainly there are no guarantees when it comes to the portal. You don't know what a guy is going to be able to produce when they get to a high major level, especially coming up from a Sam Houston State. But in the case of Lamar Wilkerson, I do think that he's going to translate, because this kid is about as pure as it gets as a scorer in the country. I think he was 13th nationally in points per game. And in terms of shooting the basketball, on 226 attempts, he shot 43% from beyond the arc. I mean, that is a big breath of fresh air
And
for
everyone he
Indiana
played knew he
fans at
was going to
the
be
point guard
shooting,
spot.
right?
What was that?
Everyone he played knew he was going to be shooting.
Exactly. And still, he found a way to get open. He found a way to get his shots. And then he also shot 50% on twos, right? So he's comfortable getting to the lane, getting around the rim. He's fine as a facilitator, but he's definitely score first. I do think there's work for him to be done on the defensive end. But I think a lot of people also forget he's 6'5", right? This is a big guard. He's big. And I think that trends positively when it comes to the defensive side of the ball. Good free throw shooter. I would like for him to get to the foul line a little bit more. Just free throw rate was just 21.8. He did only attempt 97 free throws, but did shoot 83% on them. I think that he will get to the line more in the Big Ten, just because he's gonna have a harder time getting to the rim and getting his shot off without getting fouled. But when you can beat out of Kentucky, you can beat out of Auburn for a player like Lamar Wilkerson, I think that's really impressive. And I think it also stood out. I think you listened to, I think it was in the interview that he did with the Field of 68, where he said that Darren DeVries flew down there to see him before he committed to basically make a final pitch or ploy to get him to come to IU. And I think that's always really nice to see and a really good sign on the recruiting trail, especially so early on in his tenure. I think DeVries is putting in the work, and I think they've kind of identified a certain archetype of the player they want. I mean, you're looking at these guys, all of them have this kind of chip on their shoulder mentality. 3 of them are JUCO guys, one of them being Lamar Wilkerson, Jason Drake, who committed the other day, spent a year at JUCO, and then Josiah Miles from North Florida, who we haven't talked about yet, as well, was at JUCO. So, I mean, things are trending in a positive direction with the recruiting side of things. And it's always really nice to hear when you have a head coach that goes out of their way to prioritize a player and make them feel comfortable and like they're making a good decision in coming to your school. And I think Lamar Wilkerson is going to be a home run player for IU next year.
Yeah, I think that also resonated with the fan base because it kind of seemed like the opposite of something that the previous head coach would have done in terms of going down to close the deal. I mean, there was obviously a lot said and written about Mike Woodson and kind of his approach to recruiting, whereas DeVries seems to be grinding it out on a day-to-day basis as he builds out this roster. So I think that excited a lot of Indiana fans. A couple more guys here to talk about. I think going in chronological order, Josiah Miles was the next, but we had a situation, I think it was maybe a week ago today, where we had a commitment at 9:20 p.m. and then we had another one at 11:28 p.m. At night. So it was kind of succession 2 in a row there with Miles and Tate and Connerway. Just talking about both of those guys, what do you like about Miles and Connerway?
We can start with Connerway because I love that kid, Alex. I mean, if you watch his tape, he is by far my favorite addition for IU in the transfer portal. We already talked about Connor Enright defensively. Tate Connerway was probably the best defensive guard available in the transfer portal, at least when Indiana got him, in my opinion. He takes some risk, but at 6'3", 186 pounds, he was a Sun Belt Player of the Year. He was 3rd in the nation in steals. He's got long arms. He's aggressive. And then offensively, he's got an excellent quick burst, great north and south speed. He can get downhill. He's not the best spot-up shooter in the world, but IU's not going to need him to be with the type of player they've added around. If you can just get Connerway into the lane and he can make good choices, which he did last year, he's going to be a really fun player for these guys to play around. 4.8 assists per game. He only turned it over under 3 times a game. And they were also 58% on twos. For a skinny 6'3" guard, that's really impressive. You watch some of his tape, the way he's able to find some of these angles around the basket and hang in the air and, lay something tough off the glass or make a tough pass. It's really impressive. And I think those kind of things translate to high major play if you're the Sun Belt Player of the Year, right? I mean, I covered the Sun Belt Player of the Year from the previous year, Terrence Edwards Jr. at Louisville this past season. He was at James Madison. before coming. Certainly there were limitations to his game, but he was a third team all ACC guy, second leading scorer on the roster. And by March, I mean, he was cooking, especially when Hepburn was kind of dealing with a groin issue and he took over some of the point guard duty. So that is a really good league. And I think you have a guy in Connerway who is the head of the snake defensively. If I know that's something Mike Woodson would say a lot, but he will get after it. And then he can also run the show. And I think if you also watch his tape, you'll see a guy who plays with a lot of fire, a lot of passion, and he wants to win. And I think to be a point guard in the Big Ten, you have to have that.
Yeah, and you saw what a player who can control the game defensively could do last season at Louisville when Chucky Hepburn came over. So I think, does that have a little bit to do with why you're excited in terms of Connerway's impact?
I think so. I don't think he may not have the exact same production that Chucky had defensively.
That'd be hard. That'd be hard to do.
Yeah.
Top 15, 20 player in all of college basketball. If you had that type of production, then you're talking about Indiana as a Sweet 16 or beyond team. So
exactly. But ACC Defensive Player of the Year, a guy who some players, they just have a knack for it, right? They just have a really good feel for the game. I think especially you see in some point guards, they do. And his aggressiveness defensively, this is Connerway I'm talking about, it can put him in some difficult spots at times, but he loves a good pickpocket, and he's just so handsy and aggressive, and he plays all the correct angles. He's just really fun to watch defend. And I think you watch a guy like, at least I did, Chucky Hepburn, run around, defend multiple positions, be so aggressive and active, and Pat Kelsey basically let him roam free and just wreak havoc. And it worked, right? I mean, Louisville was a top 30 defensive team in the nation. And if Connerway has anywhere close to that kind of impact defensively, it's going to be really fun to watch.
What about Josiah Miles? I like him a lot just from the potential that he has. He was a 15, point per game scorer last year at North Florida. And also the fact that he has multiple years of eligibility. That's not something that many of these guys that they picked up have. So I think he can be a guy that whether he starts or comes off the bench next season, he's a guy you have for 2 years. So I think that's important too.
I mean, he took 224 threes at North Florida. And North Florida, I believe they shot the highest
volume of threes, yeah,
right, in the country. So he's obviously not going to shoot over 200 threes next season at Indiana with the other players that IU has, but he was 77th percentile in spot up shooting. And then you also look at his frame. He's pretty big, 6'6", 205 pounds. You mentioned that he has multiple years of eligibility left. He had a great improvement from his freshman to sophomore year at North Florida, 9.7 point average increase, and a lot of growth in that year for him. But the thing I like most of all about him is he's a tenacious rebounder. 6.8 rebounds a game. That was second on the team at North Florida. And at his size, at 6'6", that's really impressive. And if you can find a role off the bench for Josiah Miles as a knockdown 3-point shooter with some size and a good rebounder, he's going to be hard to keep off the floor, and he's going to find playing time. I think his upside is there. He's definitely got room to improve as a ball handler. The ball skills stuff, he's not quite there, I think, at the high major level in terms of playmaking for himself. But he's not going to have to be next year, right? I mean, he's got a couple years left. So there's time for him to figure these things out in a conference like the Big Ten. And then also you talk about the straight line drives, right? Him just cutting to the basket, being physical, being able to put the ball down on the floor and make an aggressive play at the rim. He certainly can do that, 55.6% on twos. And the 3-point volume stands out. You may look at his percentage and you see, okay, he shot 33%. You know, if we want a 3-and-D guy who's 6'6", we could do a little bit better than that. But I think on 224 attempts, and a lot of those coming, off the dribble, which he's not going to have as many opportunities at Indiana next season, it's definitely a good trajectory for him to be on. I hate calling guys like him projects. I think that's an overstatement. But out of the guys that Indiana has brought in, he certainly is the biggest project of them all because they're going to have to work with them on some things. But there's plenty of potential and room for growth because he's not just going to be there for 1 year. That's the
Right.
plan, at
I
least.
mean, a guy that scores 15 at Division One, if that's kind of your guy that you have to work with a little bit, that's a pretty good starting
Exactly.
place to
Yeah.
have. The other thing about him, and I've talked to him, Enright, and the last guy we're going to talk about, Jason Drake. All three of those guys, they genuinely seem excited and bought into the idea of the team concept just from, you know, having a conversation with them and kind of what DeVries is building. They want to be part of a team that shares the ball and, you know, plays together, and they all kind of said that when I spoke to him. So that's the other thing about him is that, you know, I don't think he's going to average 15 a game at Indiana, but if he can be a guy coming off the bench that gives you, you know, 6 or 7 points and has an occasional game where he, you know, he gets hot and hit 3 or 4 threes, I think that's what you want out of him. You can't ever have enough offense, particularly off the bench. And who knows, maybe he's a guy that does start some games. We don't know. We got to see how this all pans out. But
And,
he's a guy that I think has a ton of potential.
and I think he's another guy when you talk about the kind of chip on their shoulder, blue collar, lunch pail type player that is comfortable being put in a role. I think that is an underrated aspect when it comes to modern day college basketball and recruiting. A lot of people, it's just talent, right? Let's just accumulate the most talent possible, and then we can make it work. But you know, that's not always how it works. Sometimes you need a guy who's comfortable just being a 3-and-D and rebounding and coming off the bench and being a defensive spark. And I think you look at Connor Enright and you look at Josiah Miles, those guys fit that perfectly while also having room to improve and grow in their individual aspects as playmakers and players. So I think it's really important to identify guys like that. I mean, you look at the guys that this fan base connected with most recently. I think of Anthony Leal. I think of Luke Goody. I think of Trace Jackson Davis. I even think of a Miller Kopp at times. I
Galloway.
also Trey Galloway. Those are all guys who could do multiple things well, but they fit a role besides maybe Trace Jackson Davis, of course, in that conversation. And they fit a role and they were comfortable with that role and they knew what they were supposed to do and they did it. And I think this fan base has a certain appreciation for those kind of players and the kind of guys that Darren DeVries is bringing in. I think a lot of them fit that standard.
Last guy I want to get to before I let you go, Jason Drake, who if we would have had this conversation a week ago, no one would have been talking about. His news of his visit broke earlier this week, and he gets on campus, makes a commitment shortly after. He's another guy that's kind of grinded his way up through the college basketball ranks. Started at Cleveland State, went the JUCO route, then had a really solid year last year at Drexel, and he's another guy that has, you know, a couple of years of eligibility. So he's a guy that you could maybe say the first year, you know, this is going to be your role, but you have a chance to step into a bigger role maybe in year two. But already a guy that's proven himself at the Division I level. I think he averaged over 12 points, over 3 rebounds, over 3 assists. I know you did a breakdown on him most recently, so sure he's still fresh in your mind. What did you like about his game and what you saw from him on film?
Biggest thing I liked about it, his mentality. I mean, this is a kid. He goes to Cleveland State for a year. I actually read the interview you put out with him, and you know things don't go well for him. He wasn't playing. He didn't necessarily fit in with the system there. Then he's like, you know what? I'm going to take some time. I'm going to go to Butler Community College out in Kansas, and I'm going to work on my skills. He only averaged 9 points a game at the JUCO level, but he did enough to prove to people that he could play at the Division I level. He goes to Drexel, a team in the CAA, which, you know, they've had their ups and downs, but a program that has produced some guys. Amari Williams came from there, who was at Kentucky last season and was one of the better rim runners in the country. And you look at Jason Drake, he's kind of that do-it-all depth piece point guard. He can run the pick and roll effectively. He's effective on the perimeter, shot just under 40% from three, 87% from the foul line, more than capable as a shooter. And then he's got a good assist rate, 27.6. That was sixth highest in the CAA. And then he's also a bit of a bulldog in transition who loves to push the pace. 14% of his baskets came in transition. I don't think when we're talking about Jason Drake, we're not talking about, the starting point guard at Indiana next season. I know we're not talking about that, but you said it. Multiple years of eligibility remaining because of the JUCO ruling. He's going to be a valuable depth piece. And again, you look at the guards that Darren DeVries has brought in, they all kind of fit this certain mold, right? They've all got this good assist rate, low turnover rate, can shoot the basketball well. They're capable from distance. And they've all kind of got that underdog mentality and that little bit of an edge to them. And I think to play point guard at a school like Indiana and in the Big Ten, that's kind of a necessity. And Jason Drake was basically a do-it-all player. He's got a good toolkit. He's not going to light it up offensively. I don't think he'll ever be that kind of player at the college level, but another guy that you can fit into a role and he's comfortable being in that role.
I loved how he talked about, and I didn't even bring this up, he just brought it up on his own, like growing up rooting for Michigan and the fact that he's going to be able to now play in the Big Ten. Like that was always a dream of it. Like that's cool to hear, like, because, covering recruiting for as long as I have, I've talked to plenty of kids like ranked for anywhere from, the 5-star kids. I remember one time talking to Kyrie Irving. I remember talking to Tim Priller when Indiana had recruited him. So I've kind of talked to every type of prospect, but the fact that he brought that up in terms of it being a dream for him to be in the Big Ten, you don't necessarily hear that a lot from a lot of kids. I mean, it's a lot of kids expect maybe that they're going to be going to the high level. He actually probably, that was something he thought about as a high school kid, and now he's actually going to get to live that out. And he mentioned playing against Michigan State and walking into Assembly Hall and that feeling. I mean, I'm sure, playing at Cleveland State, playing at JUCO, playing at Drexel, walking into Assembly Hall was special for him because, he's felt like he finally arrived. And I feel like just all of these guys coming from where they all have their own different path, their own different story, but I think most of them, if not all of them, are going to feel appreciative for the opportunity to play at a program like Indiana. Whereas I don't necessarily think we could say that about everyone that's come in the last couple of years.
And this is where you go back and you listen to Darren DeVries' introductory press conference. You talked about, when it comes to assembling a roster, there are certain things besides player talent level and role that you have to consider. What kind of people are they? What kind of guy are they going to be in the locker room? Are they going to love playing in the candy stripes? Is that something that's going to matter to them? And I think you look across the board at the kind of players that they've gotten so far. I think most, if not all of them, fit into that mold. And I think that's a really underrated, valuable aspect when it comes to acquiring players. Because you mentioned, guys who they love playing for a team, right? They want to be in a team environment. They want to be at a place where the team is above all. And I think that you share the basketball, play for each other, play together, play for the name on the front of the jersey, right? I mean, that's kind of what Indiana is about and has been about in the entire history of the program. And I think, that he identifies that that's important to people in this fan base, and he's finding players where that's important to them.
For sure. Well, Durham, where can people read your stuff now and get your newsletter?
You go on X at 804Derm, as always, and then the newsletter on Substack, Inside Indiana Basketball with William McDermott. I probably need to come up with a little
shorter
bit of
name?
a better, shorter name than that. Maybe I'll work on that in the next couple of weeks. But I post breakdowns. I've got little videos I'll post on Twitter and in the Substack as well on each of these guys. That are about 1 to 2 minutes long on their film. Post some column type stuff on there where I give my take on things. And if if you want to check it out and join. I think I'm just a few subscribers away from 100, which is always a big milestone.
For sure.
I've only been doing it for 7-8 months since the season started. So it's been fun, and I love talking about IU basketball, and I'm always going to follow the team no matter where I am. So it's always something that I love talking about.
Well, it's good to talk to you, man. Proud of everything that you've been able to accomplish in just a little less than a year. A year ago, you're graduating, so it's crazy how time flies. But
I know.
Awesome that you've had success with the radio stuff. I know you have a huge passion for broadcasting, so hopefully your role will continue to grow in that realm, and you'll continue to share your thoughts on IU basketball. Thanks for taking the time to come on Podcast on the Brink. Always good to see you and talk to you.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate you.
Thanks, everybody, as always, for listening to Podcast on the Brink. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts, preferably 5 stars if you don't mind, and over on Spotify as well. Leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.